She came home from a business trip to celebrate her success. But when she opened her garage, her dream car was gone, and so was her family's trust. The Frankfurt deal was finally closed. 6 long days of negotiations, 1,000 cups of coffee, and a few arguments that nearly ended my sanity, but I'd done it. I'd secured the European expansion my boss had been chasing for 2 years straight. My body ached from the 9-hour flight, but that dull pain was drowned out by something stronger: triumph. The kind that makes your heart thump a little faster, your shoulders sit a little taller. I steered my rental car through familiar suburban streets, toward the house where I grew up. I'd promised Mom I'd stop by before heading home. She'd want to hear everything about the flight, the deal, and she'd probably insist on feeding me something homemade. No matter how old I got, she still saw me as the kid who needed a good meal after a big day. The sun was setting, casting everything in that warm amber light that makes even ordinary streets look like something out of a memory. When I turned onto Maple Street, I smiled without meaning to. Dad had finally trimmed the overgrown bushes beside the garage. It was such a small thing, but it made the house look cared for, stable, safe. I parked in the driveway, stepping out in my black pumps. They pinched my feet, but I didn't care. My charcoal pencil skirt and wrinkled silk blouse still made me look like what I'd become: a senior financial analyst who'd just landed a career-making deal. I reached into my purse for the garage remote, already imagining the sight of my car sitting safely inside my pride and joy, my Challenger. I'd left it there before the trip. The garage was safer than the street parking at my apartment complex. I pressed the button. The familiar mechanical hum filled the air as the garage door lifted. And then nothing, just an empty, echoing space. My heart dropped so hard I felt dizzy. Where was it? The garage was bare except for Dad's old lawnmower and Mom's gardening tools. No sleek black car, no polished chrome, just emptiness. No. 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 I muttered, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. My stomach twisted as I dropped the remote, grabbed my suitcase, and rushed inside. This couldn't be happening. Not my car. Not the one I'd worked 6 years for. I burst through the side door into the kitchen and froze. They were waiting for me. Mom, Dad, and my sister, Kendra, sitting around the oak table like they were staging an intervention. The silence hit me first. Then, the guilt. Dad couldn't meet my eyes. Mom gave me that tight, fake sweet smile she used when something terrible was coming. Kendra, on the other hand, looked composed, too composed, like she'd rehearsed this. Avery, honey. Mom started, her voice dripping with sugar. Don't overreact. Where's my car? My voice came out sharp, low, dangerous. Kendra straightened in her seat, that practiced influencer confidence flickering across her face. It's just temporary. I'll pay it all back. My brain barely processed the words. Pay what back? Mom shot Dad a quick glance. He finally exhaled, voice rough. We had to make a tough decision. Kendra needed startup capital for her business. I blinked. What? We took it to Cornerstone Pawn, he said, staring down at his hands. Got $45,000 for it. The world tilted. My knees almost gave out. You did what? We have due and sender, then times of clanks of two had, and I see the times of contrast. It's a loan against the car, not a sale. Kendra said quickly, leaning forward like she could talk me out of my own fury. Once my cosmetics line launches, I'll pay it back with interest. You'll have your car back in no time. My heart was pounding in my ears. Images flashed through my head: the endless nights hunched over spreadsheets, the 70-hour work weeks, the promotions I'd fought tooth and nail for, the vacations I never took, the dinners I skipped, all to save enough for that car. I remembered Grandpa's rough hands guiding mine over an engine when I was 9. These machines aren't just transportation. Avery girl, he'd said. They're dreams made solid. Someday, you'll have your own beauty. Just be patient. That Challenger was more than a car. It was proof that the sacrifices meant something. My cosmetics startup is revolutionary, Kendra was saying now, flipping her hair over her shoulder. I've developed a formula that, I don't care if you've discovered the fountain of youth in a bottle, I snapped. That car wasn't yours to take. Mom's lips thinned. Avery, family helps family. You make plenty of money at your job. Kendra needs this chance to succeed. So, you used my spare key, I said quietly. And my title. Mom's silence was answer enough. The betrayal hit like a punch to the gut. You committed fraud, I said, voice shaking. Dad flinched. We're your parents, Mom countered. We've always supported both our girls equally. A bitter laugh escaped me. Equally? That's what you call this? My phone buzzed. A notification popped up from my insurance company. A lien had been placed against my vehicle. That was it. The ice settled in my veins. You have 30 days, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. 30 days to get my car back, or I'm pressing charges for fraud and theft. Mom gasped. Charges? Against your own family? Family doesn't steal from each other. I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. The sound rattled the family photos on the wall, those smiling faces that now felt like lies. The pawn shop reeked of cheap air freshener and desperation. I straightened my blazer, trying to look composed. Like a woman in control. Not one whose world had just imploded. The man behind the counter, Gordon, according to his name tag, slid paperwork toward me. Your vehicle was brought in 5 days ago. Loan amount, $45,000, plus our standard fees. I scanned the paper, finance brain kicking in automatically. $3,000 in fees? I said sharply. That's practically predatory. He shrugged. Classic car market's volatile. We take risks. If the loan isn't repaid in 35 days, we auction the vehicle. Full payment required by October 3rd, $48,000 total. Help for. And seat in there probleme. In clean sodded form, my pulse quickened as I flipped to the signature line and froze. There it was, my name, except it wasn't my signature. Close, but wrong. The loop on the final N didn't curve up the way mine always did. This isn't my signature, I said. Gordon's neutral expression faltered. Ma'am, if you're suggesting fraud. I'm not suggesting, I interrupted. I'm stating. I pulled out my driver's license and work contract. Compare them, he did, and I saw it, his discomfort. I'll, need to speak with my manager, he said. Please do. And while you're at it, pull the security footage from that transaction. My voice was calm, but my hands trembled. I was in Frankfurt, Germany. On business. What it? 20 minutes later, the manager confirmed it. My parents had signed the documents. The pawn shop had footage. They hadn't just lied, they'd committed actual, prosecutable fraud. I could file a police report right then and there. The manager even offered to help, but I couldn't bring myself to say the words. Not yet. Back in my apartment, I sat on the couch, coat still on, staring at the family photo album I hadn't opened in years. Kendra's 16th birthday, 40 guests, a professional photographer, a cake taller than she was. My 16th birthday? No pictures. I'd been working a part-time job at the mall, saving for college application fees. Kendra's high school graduation, dad rented a limousine. My college graduation? Empty seats where my parents should have been. Christmas 2018, Kendra beside a new red Volkswagen with a big bow on top. I was in the background, holding a department store sweater, smiling that tight smile that never reached my eyes. The pattern was there all along. Every milestone, every choice, they'd always chosen her. My phone rang. Uncle Harvey's name lit up. I just heard, he said without even saying hello. Your mom called me. Tried to spin it. Oh yeah? How'd she spin selling my car? He snorted. Said you were overreacting. That family helps family. Of course she did. My voice broke despite myself. I just didn't think they'd go this far. What are you gonna do, kid? I didn't know. That night, my aunt called too. Aunt Patricia, always the peacemaker. They were just trying to help Kendra succeed, she pleaded. Can't you find some compassion? The doorbell rang before I could answer. Jessica from work stood there holding Thai takeout and a bottle of wine. You look like hell, she said matter-of-factly, stepping inside. Thanks for the honesty. I laughed weakly. Over spicy noodles, I told her everything. She didn't interrupt until the end. You know this is criminal, right? She said softly. They stole your car, Avery. I know. But they're my family. This thanks for the one of housey. For the Raffrey. No my for. That makes it worse, she said. Not better. Her words stuck in my head long after she left. The next morning I texted Kendra. Coffee. Noon. The place near your apartment. Just us. When I walked in, she was already there. Sunglasses. No makeup. The confidence was gone. Let me see the business plan, I said, sitting down. What? The business plan. Financials, projections, supplier contracts, anything. She hesitated, then pulled out a few papers. A mood board. A list of product names. Crude sketches, no numbers, no plan, nothing real. This is what you stole my car for? I said quietly. Tears filled her eyes. I just wanted a chance. You've always been the successful one, the responsible one. Everyone compares me to you. I just wanted to make you proud. I earned my chance, I said evenly. I didn't steal it from anyone else. She broke down. My first shipment arrived yesterday. Half the containers cracked. Customers are already complaining. The formula separates after a few hours. Everything's falling apart. Then, as if to twist the knife, my phone buzzed. A new text. From her, I need more money to fix this. Please, Avery. I'm desperate. I looked up from the screen. Not a penny more, I said, standing up. You fix this, or we all lose. Her face crumpled, but I didn't look back. For the first time, I wasn't cleaning up her mess. For the first time, the responsibility wasn't mine to carry. 10 days after discovering the empty garage, Kendra's dream had already turned into ashes. Every morning, new disaster updates from her business pinged my phone like clockwork, each one more chaotic than the last. Day 3. Suppliers refusing further shipments after her payments bounced. Day 5. Refund requests flooding her social media. Day 7. Her business account frozen by the bank. Day 10. Kendra barricaded inside her apartment, ignoring calls from everyone including our parents. I tried to work. God knows I tried, but even sitting in my office at Bridgewater Capital, staring at spreadsheets and projections for the Frankfurt expansion deal, I couldn't think straight. Numbers blurred. Deadlines slipped. I kept seeing the empty space where my car should have been the one symbol of everything I'd built for myself. The phone on my desk rang, pulling me out of the haze. It was Director Palmer, my boss. Avery, I need those final projections by 4, he said, his tone firm but not unkind. You look exhausted. Everything okay at home? I forced a professional smile into my voice. Everything's fine. You'll have those projections within the hour. The lie tasted bitter. Nothing was fine. My family had betrayed me. My sister's life was imploding. And my career was teetering because I couldn't compartmentalize my own pain anymore. That Sunday, I parked my rental car at the curb outside my parents' house, not in the driveway. It was a small act of defiance, but it made me feel in control, somehow. Inside, the smell of Mom's pot roast filled the kitchen. She'd pulled out the good china, the kind reserved for Christmas, or when she was desperate to smooth things over. Dad sat at the table, slouched, eyes hollow. Kendra arrived last. Her once perfect hair hung limp, her oversized sunglasses hiding what was left of her pride. Let's eat while it's hot, Mom said softly, placing food onto plates with trembling hands. We sat in silence. The scrape of forks against ceramic was the only sound. Halfway through the meal, Mom broke first. Kendra's been having a difficult time with her business, she said, patting Kendra's hand. Everyone fails sometimes. I set down my fork. This isn't about failure, I said quietly. It's about theft. Dad flinched. We thought we were helping, he said. We just wanted Kendra to have her chance. At my expense, I said flatly. You didn't just take a car. I continued, voice trembling but steady. You took everything it represented. 6 years of sacrifice. Grandpa's legacy. The one thing that proved I wasn't wasting my life chasing numbers. Mom opened her mouth. Honey, it's just a vehicle. It was my dream, Mom. My voice rose. And you treated it like a spare object you could cash in when your favorite daughter needed a bailout. Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Then the doorbell. Dad looked relieved to have an excuse to escape the conversation. He shuffled off to answer it, and when he returned, my uncle, Harvey, followed him inside. What the hell were you thinking, Gerald? Harvey barked, wasting no time. Avery called me. I had to see this circus for myself. Mom stiffened. This is a family matter, Harvey. Wace. Tick 9. Exactly why I'm here, he said, crossing his arms. Someone in this family needs to stand up for the person you threw under the bus. Dad's face reddened. Wait just a minute. No, you wait. The words hit like a slap, and for once, I wasn't the one saying them. I reached for my briefcase, the one sitting beside me on the chair. The leather felt cool under my palm as I pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. We need to talk about what happens next, I said quietly. Inside were 3 printouts. The vehicle title, Colorado fraud statutes, and sentencing guidelines for title forgery. This is a felony, I said simply. I could send you both to jail. Thank you, supported Chance. Mom's face drained of color. You wouldn't. I don't want to, I said truthfully. But you need to understand what you've done. Dad looked down at the papers. I watched his eyes flicker over the text, realizing, probably for the first time, the gravity of it all. 2 to 5 years, I said clinically. That's the sentence range for title fraud. Mom broke down, ugly sobs shaking her shoulders. It wasn't her usual emotional manipulation. This time, it sounded real. Dad reached for her hand, his own eyes glassy. What have we done to you? He whispered. For the first time, I saw genuine remorse in his face, not regret for being caught, but for hurting me. Kendra removed her sunglasses, revealing swollen, red-rimmed eyes. This is my fault, she said hoarsely. I pushed them to do it. I convinced them you'd understand once my business took off. Uncle Harvey leaned forward, voice level. So what's the plan? Because that pawn shop won't wait forever. I took a breath. We have 25 days before they auction the car. Mom dabbed at her tears. What can we do? I opened my calculator. We figure out what we can raise. For the next hour, we went through everything. Dad could apply for a home equity line of credit about $30,000, but it'd take 2 weeks to process. Kendra could sell her BMW and empty her savings. Maybe $12,000 there. I could add $6,000 from my emergency fund. Harvey sat quietly through it all, finally saying, I can loan you $5,000. But only because Avery shouldn't be the one paying for this mess. The math was brutal. Even combining everything, we were short. And the pawn shop required a $15,000 deposit immediately to halt the auction process. I'll call them tomorrow, Dad said, his voice steadier. See if they'll work with us. When I left that night, the weight on my chest was still there, but underneath it, something else had started to form. Resolve. The betrayal hadn't vanished, but for the first time, there was a plan, a way forward. Back in my apartment, I sat on the edge of my bed, holding a framed photo of me and Grandpa beside that same car, the one he'd helped me dream into existence. Cars are just metal and chrome, he'd said. It's what they represent that matters. He was right. This wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about demanding respect from people who never thought I'd need it. I dialed my parents' number. Dad answered immediately. I'll help, I said. But things will never be the same. Silence. Heavy, understanding silence. I know, he said softly. We'll make this right, Avery. I promise. I ended the call without replying. Some promises come too late to mean anything. But I was done waiting for words. It was time for action. Over the next few days, the entire family scrambled. Everyone made sacrifices, visible and invisible. Kendra stood in a luxury boutique, her prized Hermes scarves spread across the counter for appraisal. $8,000 for the lot. The shop owner said, lips pursed. Kendra swallowed hard. Done. Across town, Dad walked into the warehouse where he used to work nights 2 decades ago. Night shift, he told his old manager. The man raised an eyebrow. Gerald, you haven't worked nights in 20 years. Just temporary, Dad muttered. Need the differential pay. The manager sighed, handing him a clipboard. This about that car situation your brother mentioned? Dad nodded once. Hope it's worth it, the man said. At home, Mom wrapped Grandma's silver candlesticks in tissue paper, her hands trembling. They'd survived the Depression, witnessed 50 years of family celebrations. She placed them in a box next to the pearl necklace Dad gave her on their 25th anniversary. The pawnbroker at Fletcher's barely glanced at the items before saying, $3,000, barely enough to cover next week's interest. My own sacrifices came in sleepless nights. I pushed myself harder than ever at Bridgewater, taking on extra accounts and chasing every bonus that could bring us closer to saving the car. When I finally handed over the first deposit receipt to Cornerstone Pawn, the manager gave me a curt nod. Auction postponed. Esket. A small victory but followed quickly by a setback. The bank delayed Dad's home equity approval pending a property reassessment. Every step forward came with 2 steps back. You're making progress, Jessica said one night as we ate takeout in my cubicle. Your sister called me, by the way. I blinked. She what? Yeah. Wanted to know if we were hiring entry-level positions in the financial group. I stared at her, shocked. Kendra? In finance? Jessica shrugged. She sounded serious. Later that week, I saw her for myself. Across the food court, wearing plain black slacks and a white button-down. No designer labels, no heavy makeup, no entourage. She was standing outside Nordstrom's employee entrance. Her first day. That night, she called me. I had no idea, she whispered. 8 hours on my feet, smiling at people who treat you like furniture. And you've been doing this for years? I leaned against my kitchen counter. Yeah. I used to call you boring, she said, her voice cracking. You weren't boring. You were responsible. I didn't know what to say. 3 days later, we met for coffee again. No sunglasses this time. No pretense. I was selfish, she said simply. Not just about the car, about everything. Thanks for watching. I wrapped my hands around my mug, letting the warmth seep into my palms. Pretty words, Ken. I know, she said. That's why I'm trying to show you with actions. At my parents' house, Dad was buried in bank statements, squinting under the harsh kitchen light. These numbers don't add up, he muttered. Mom appeared with a stack of papers, loan applications, all in Kendra's handwriting. Credit cards, personal loans. $80,000 in debt. They were stunned. The next morning, they sat across from Mr. Winters, their old financial advisor. This home equity loan will delay your retirement by at least 5 years, he said gently. That's assuming no other surprises. Hey, just present 5 dimes. Mom just stared at her hands, her wedding ring hanging loose. When I dropped off my share of the next payment, Dad met me on the porch. He didn't say much, just, We failed you. Long before the car. I sat beside him. The old wooden steps creaked beneath us. All those years, he said quietly. We praised Kendra's dreams while dismissing yours. You never asked for much, so we assumed you didn't need much. The evening sun painted everything gold. We sat in silence, and for the first time, he didn't try to justify it, he just owned it. The home equity line finally came through after 2 endless weeks of waiting, 2 weeks filled with sleepless nights, bank calls, and half-breath prayers. But relief didn't last long. Dad's voice was tight when he told me over the phone. The funds won't be available for 3 more days. Processing delay. I closed my eyes, gripping my pen so hard it nearly snapped. 3 days? The pawn shop deadline's in 2. I know. His voice cracked. I'm trying to negotiate. By the next morning, things went from tense to dire. Cornerstone Pawn called. A new buyer had appeared, offering full cash to purchase my Challenger. We'll have to honor the higher bid unless your payment arrives first, the broker said, sounding almost apologetic. Dad tried pleading with them. We just need 2 more days, I heard him say, his tone desperate. Business is business, the man replied. First money here gets the car. When he hung up, the silence on the line stretched like a wire, pulled too tight. Then we all moved at once. Kendra drained the last of her savings. Mom sold her anniversary earrings, the diamond ones Dad had saved for years to buy. I maxed out my emergency credit line, biting back the guilt that came with it. Still short, $3,000 short. It's not enough, Mom said, her voice hollow as we gathered around the kitchen table that night. The deadline's tomorrow at noon. The room felt suffocating. Dad's head hung low in defeat. We did everything we could, then knock. Knock. We all turned. Uncle Harvey stood in the doorway, his checkbook already in hand. Family helps family, he said simply. But this time, it means doing what's right. Mom's eyes filled instantly. Dad looked away, ashamed. Don't thank me, Harvey said gruffly. Just make it count. The next morning, we crowded into the bank, watching the digital clock tick closer to noon, 11:34. The clerk was still typing, 11:38. Dad's hands were shaking so badly he had to re-sign one of the forms, 11:42. The confirmation appeared on the screen. Payment received. No one spoke. We just exhaled collectively, deeply. Like we'd all been holding our breath for a month. That afternoon, the early spring sun shimmered on the chrome trim of my Challenger as I stood in the parking lot of Cornerstone Pawn. 30 days of arguments, tears, sleepless nights, and there she was, perfect. Unbroken. I clutched the receipt in my sweaty palm as I walked inside. The same broker from before looked up. Recognition flickered across his face. Miss Martin, he said. Here for your vehicle. I nodded. He slid the paperwork across the counter. I signed my name this time with a hand that trembled less from fear and more from disbelief. He counted the cashier's check twice before returning my folder title and keys enclosed. All square, he said, but I barely heard him. The moment the keys hit my palm, something inside me cracked open. I stepped outside into the sunlight, and traced my fingers along the familiar glossy paint, searching for scratches that weren't there. The chrome gleamed like nothing had happened, like betrayal hadn't driven this car away from me. They detailed it yesterday, the broker called after me. Policy before return. I nodded absently. This should have felt triumphant. But it didn't. It felt hollow. Because what was victory without trust? What was winning if it cost you your peace? I got in, started the engine. The growl was the same deep hum I'd loved since the day I bought her. The sound vibrated through my bones, a heartbeat I'd almost lost. As I pulled away, tears blurred my vision. By the time I reached my apartment, they dried into salt tracks on my cheeks. My car was home. But part of me still wasn't. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Sunday dinner. 5 o'clock. Dad's grilling steaks. The message landed like a stone in my stomach. I thought about ignoring it, maybe pretending I hadn't seen it. But avoidance had never solved anything before. So I typed back a simple, I'll be there. Some conversations had to happen face to face. Sunday came with perfect spring weather, warm light spilling across the yard as I pulled into the driveway. The Challenger's engine announced my arrival before I even stepped out. Dad froze, mid-spatula flip at the grill. Mom appeared in the doorway, twisting a dish towel in her hands. Dinner was quiet, painfully quiet. We passed food, exchanged small talk about weather and errands, but every sentence felt rehearsed. Even Kendra, usually full of chatter, barely looked up from her plate. Finally, Dad set down his fork. His voice was careful, formal. Avery, there are some things I need to say. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, his hands trembling slightly, and began to read. I betrayed your trust. I violated your property rights. I failed, as your father, to protect what mattered to you. Each line was deliberate, practiced, but his eyes were wet. Mom reached across the table, tears spilling freely. Please forgive us, sweetheart. We were wrong. So terribly wrong. Kendra straightened in her chair. I've been working at Macy's for 3 weeks, she said softly, pulling a small notebook from her bag. I made a budget plan to pay you back. It'll take time, but every penny will be returned. They all watched me. 3 faces, hopeful, scared, waiting. I let the silence stretch before I finally spoke. Healing takes time, I said. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight. The air shifted. The relief was visible, even without smiles. This wasn't forgiveness. But it was a beginning. 2 days later, I sat across from Rachel Holman, the lawyer whose card I'd been carrying in my wallet for weeks. You have a solid case, she said, scanning the documents. Title fraud, identity theft, both serious. If you press charges, your parents could face jail time. I stared at the family photo on her desk, 3 generations smiling in matching sweaters. What are my other options? She leaned back. A formal repayment agreement, legally binding, no criminal record. You'd still hold them accountable. I nodded slowly. That Sunday, I gathered everyone around the same dining table where this nightmare had started. Uncle Harvey sat beside me, silent and steady as I laid out the papers. These are contracts, I explained. Monthly payments for 2 years with interest. Dad's hands shook as he signed, but he didn't look away. We'll honor this, Avery, he said. Every term. The power shift was almost physical. For the first time in my life, my boundaries weren't just words. They were law. Afterward, as Harvey walked me to my car, I admitted, I never wanted this kind of authority over them. He nodded. Sometimes respect has to be enforced before it's freely given. Workshen sees Popley with Imand. All of there. The next month, the extended family gathered for our annual barbecue, the perfect stage for the usual gossip and denial. I knew what was coming. Aunt Patricia always had something to say. She cornered me by the potato salad, her wine glass swaying dangerously. Everyone makes mistakes, dear. You've made your point. Time to let it go, don't you think? Before I could respond, Uncle Harvey appeared beside me, calm but firm. They need to own what they did, Patricia. No minimizing. Her mouth opened and closed like a startled fish. Then Kendra stepped forward, shoulders squared, voice trembling but steady. I manipulated my parents, she said, loud enough for the whole yard to hear. I played on their favoritism, but they chose to betray Avery. We're all accountable. The crowd fell silent. Cousin Mike gave me a slow, respectful nod, and just like that, something shifted. The truth, once buried under years of favoritism and silence, finally cracked through the surface. Later that week, I changed the garage door code at my parents' house. It wasn't an act of rebellion this time. It was protection. Will you leave a spare key with us? Mom asked carefully. Just in case of emergency. I met her gaze, steady and calm. No, I said simply. She hesitated, then nodded. I understand. And she did. Some boundaries don't need speeches, just quiet, unmistakable lines that say, never again. The mountain road stretched before me, sunlight pouring over the Colorado Rockies like liquid gold. I downshifted, the engine rumbling beneath my hands, the same sound that once symbolized ambition, now transformed into peace. 1 year had passed since I'd almost lost her. Since I'd almost lost myself. You were right, Grandpa, I whispered, patting the dashboard. Cars were just metal and chrome, but this one represented everything I'd fought for. Not just a dream regained, a life rebuilt, a woman who finally understood her own worth. As I turned onto the open highway, the wind rushed through the open window, carrying the faint scent of spring and freedom. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. Boundaries had cost me the illusion of perfect family harmony, but they'd given me something better, authentic relationships, built on respect, not guilt. And as the Challenger roared beneath me, I knew one thing for sure. Some dreams are worth fighting for. And some victories aren't loud, they're simply lived. It's strange how silence feels different once you've been through chaos. For months, every thought in my head had been a storm. But now, 1 year after getting my car back, silence didn't mean emptiness anymore. It meant peace. I still drove the Challenger every weekend. Sometimes just up the mountain roads near Denver. Sometimes nowhere in particular. It wasn't about the destination. It was about the feeling of control. The reminder that I'd fought for something that mattered and won. The engine purred beneath me like an old friend. Each mile of road was proof that I'd survived something most people don't even talk about: family betrayal. That morning, I stopped at a quiet overlook. The sun was just rising over the Rockies, the air crisp and thin. I sat in the car for a long time before I finally stepped out. The wind carried that clean mountain chill that wakes you up better than any coffee. I leaned against the hood, looking down at the valley. I thought about the last dinner at my parents' house, the one that ended with signatures and a legal contract. For the first time in a long time, they'd treated me like an adult. Like someone whose boundaries mattered. And for the first time, I'd seen them understand that love without respect isn't love, it's control. Life after that day didn't return to normal. It became something new. Dad took on those night shifts he'd promised, even when it wore him down. Mom started couponing, selling her old collectibles online. Kendra, meanwhile, was working full-time at Macy's, not as a manager, not as a brand ambassador, just as a regular employee. At first, she hated it. The hours, the standing, the monotony. But slowly, something shifted. She started sending me small updates. A text here and there. Got promoted to floor lead. Then later. Saved $400 this month. Paid extra on the car repayment. And every month, on the 15th, an automatic transfer hit my account, $300. Right on time. It wasn't much compared to the debt, but it was consistent. Reliable. That meant more to me than any grand apology. Consistency was a kind of respect I'd never received before. One Sunday afternoon, Dad called out of the blue. "Can you come by for a bit?" His voice sounded awkward, like he'd practiced that question 3 times before saying it. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something new. An extra section of the garage. Freshly built, with its own keypad and security light. Dad stood beside it, looking both proud and nervous. "I built it myself," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "A separate secure space. It's for your car." I blinked. "Dad? Only you have the code," he said, cutting me off. "Not even your mother. I just wanted you to know it's safe here now." For a second, I couldn't find words. He didn't hug me. Dad's never been the hugging type, but he gave a small nod. That quiet, old-fashioned gesture that meant more than any speech. Something inside me loosened. It wasn't forgiveness. It was recognition. He was finally learning the language of respect. Mom changed too, in ways that surprised me. She started asking permission for small things, borrowing a serving dish, visiting my apartment, even using my name in a family group text. "Would you mind if I mention your promotion to your aunt?" she'd ask, tentative, as if still expecting the old version of me, the one who'd say yes just to keep the peace. And every time, I told her the truth. Sometimes, yes. Sometimes, no. She didn't always understand, but she listened. That was new. The woman who used to speak over everyone was finally learning to pause. Maybe we all were. Kendra and I started meeting for coffee again every few weeks. Not the tense, awkward kind of meetings we used to have, but slow, honest ones. She'd talk about her job, about customers who yelled at her, about saving up for her first apartment that wasn't financed by Mom and Dad. One afternoon, she pulled a folded paper from her purse, a spreadsheet. "I made a budget," she said, half embarrassed. "It's color-coded." I smiled. "I'm rubbing off on you. Don't get cocky," she teased. Then laughed, a real, genuine laugh I hadn't heard from her in years. Then her voice softened. "You know, I think I get it now. Earning something feels different. Stronger." I nodded. "Yeah. It's yours in a way nothing handed to you ever can be. That's say take a lot or inspected describe." She tapped her coffee cup thoughtfully. "I used to think responsibility was boring. But now, it feels kind of like freedom." That hit me deeper than I expected. She wasn't just repaying me with money, she was repaying me by growing up, by finally taking ownership of her life. The contract payments kept coming. Steady. Predictable. And slowly, month after month, something healed. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But enough. Enough for phone calls to end in laughter instead of tension. Enough for Sunday dinners to feel less like court hearings and more like family again. Boundaries didn't destroy us. They rebuilt us. But this time, the foundation wasn't guilt, it was accountability. One evening, I was driving home after work when my phone rang. It was Dad. "You free this weekend?" "I think so. Why?" "Thinking of doing a family barbecue," he said, hesitating. "Your mom wants to invite Uncle Harvey too." "Harvey?" I couldn't help smiling. "You sure about that?" "Yeah," he said with a small chuckle. "Guess it's time to thank the guy who called me an idiot." That weekend, I drove the Challenger up to their house again. Uncle Harvey greeted me with a bear hug before I even reached the porch. There she is, the woman who taught the whole family what boundaries actually means. "Hi, Harvey," I laughed. "Still giving Dad a hard time?" "Always." He winked. The afternoon sun bathed the backyard in gold as we grilled, talked, and laughed. For once, it didn't feel like pretending. Even Aunt Patricia, who'd once told me to let it go, looked different, quieter, reflective. She'd seen the shift too. At one point, she pulled me aside near the garden. "You were right," she said softly. "Sometimes people need consequences to grow." It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but close enough. And it was enough. That night, after everyone left, I lingered in the driveway for a moment before heading home. The house glowed softly behind me, filled with the faint hum of family chatter and clinking dishes. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like an outsider in that house. I felt like someone who'd earned her place at the table. Someone who no longer had to shrink to be loved. As I started the engine, the headlights washed over the quiet street. Grandpa's words echoed in my mind again, words that had become almost like scripture. Cars are just metal and chrome. It's what they represent that matters. Back then, I'd thought he meant hard work. Now I realized he also meant boundaries. Because when you fight for something you love, even when it hurts, you're not just protecting an object. You're protecting your sense of self. A few months later, something unexpected happened. A local women's organization invited me to speak at a financial literacy workshop. One of my colleagues had recommended me after hearing bits of my story. At first, I said no. Public speaking wasn't exactly my thing, but that night, as I looked at the Challenger parked safely in its new garage, something in me shifted. Maybe my story wasn't just mine anymore. Maybe it could help someone else avoid losing what I almost did. So, I said yes. The auditorium wasn't large, maybe 50 chairs, a small projector, and a few folding tables lined with notebooks and coffee cups, but my palms were sweating like I was about to address Wall Street. The moderator, a kind woman named Eliza, smiled encouragingly as she introduced me. Please welcome Avery Martin, Senior Financial Analyst at Bridgewater Capital, who's here to share real lessons about money, responsibility, and protecting what matters. Applause rippled through the room. I walked up, smoothing my blazer out of habit. For a second, I thought about starting with my resume, the Frankfurt deal, or the corporate milestones that looked impressive on paper. But instead, I looked at the faces in the crowd, students, single mothers, retirees, and I decided to tell them the truth. About a year ago, I began. I came home from a business trip to find that my car, the one I'd worked 6 years to buy, was gone. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. My parents had pawned it, I continued, to fund my sister's failing business. Without telling me. Without asking. You could have heard a pin drop. I was angry. Betrayed. I wanted justice, maybe even revenge. But what I really needed was boundaries. I told them about the pawn shop, the forged signature, the sleepless nights, the deposit deadlines. I told them about the lawyer, the contract, and the slow, painful rebuild of trust. When I finished, the room was silent again, but not with shock. With understanding, Eliza stood. That, she said softly, is exactly why financial literacy matters. Not just for numbers, but for power. For protection. After the talk, people lined up to thank me. One young woman, maybe 19, lingered until the end. My name's Melissa, she said shyly. My mom sold my dad's old tools to pay for my sister's dance lessons after the divorce. He never forgave her. Her voice cracked. He used to teach me about engines when I was little. I think that's why your story hit so hard. I smiled gently. You miss him, she nodded. I thought for a moment, then held out my keys. Come outside. I want to show you something. There felt an intruth. We walked into the parking lot where my black Challenger gleamed in the sunlight. Her eyes widened. That's yours? I nodded. My grandfather taught me about cars too. He used to say they were dreams made solid. He was right. I opened the driver's door and gestured for her to sit. Go on, I said. You can't crash it parked. She laughed through her tears, sliding into the seat. Her fingers brushed the steering wheel reverently. Dreams need protecting, I told her quietly. But so do you. She nodded, wiping her eyes. That moment stayed with me for weeks. I realized I wasn't just talking about finances anymore. I was talking about boundaries, respect, and the quiet kind of strength that comes from saying no. A few months later, I officially started volunteering with the same women's organization. Every Thursday, I'd lead a small class on budgeting, contracts, and my favorite topic, financial self-defense. I called the series Guard Your Ground. Each week, more women showed up. Some brought notebooks. Others brought stories, hard ones. One woman, Sheila, said her boyfriend had pressured her into co-signing a car loan she didn't need. Another, Lillian, confessed her parents had been using her credit card for emergencies for years. I didn't just give them advice, I gave them tools. We went through examples, talked about setting limits, how to say no without apology. And for the first time in a long time, I felt purposeful, like all that pain had been building towards something useful. Meanwhile, back at Bridgewater Capital, life looked the same from the outside, but I was different. I wasn't afraid to speak up anymore. When a junior analyst tried to take credit for my work in a meeting, I didn't shrink back. Actually, I said calmly, that model was mine. I'd appreciate if we kept authorship accurate. The room went quiet for a beat, then Palmer nodded. She's right. It wasn't dramatic, just honest. And that honesty was something I'd fought to earn. The Challenger had become more than a car. Again, it was my sanctuary. Some evenings, I'd just drive with no destination, windows down, music low. The kind of drive where you remember who you are. One Friday, I stopped by my parents' house. Not for dinner. Not for obligation, just because I wanted to. Dad was in the garage, tinkering with an old toolbox. The space looked different now, organized. Cleaner. Calmer. "Hey kiddo," he said, looking up. "Didn't expect you." "I was nearby," I said. He smiled, then nodded toward the locked section he'd built. "Still keeping the code secret?" "Of course." "Good." Mom appeared behind him, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "We were just about to eat. Stay for a bit?" I hesitated. Then nodded. "Sure." Dinner was simple grilled chicken, mashed potatoes, and awkward but gentle conversation. Halfway through, Dad said, "You know, I got promoted to supervisor on night shift. Guess the old man still got it." "That's great, Dad," I said, smiling. Mom reached for my hand. "We're proud of you too, sweetheart. The workshop, the volunteering. It's wonderful." It wasn't a performance this time. There was no guilt, no forced cheer, just connection. For the first time, the word family didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Kendra arrived late that night, carrying 2 grocery bags. "Sorry," she said breathlessly. "Work ran late. I brought dessert." "What is a Clyde for the world?" She looked grounded, tired, but happy. When she saw me, she smiled. "Hey big sis, guess what?" "What?" "I paid off my last credit card today. 0 balance." I blinked, genuinely surprised. "Kendra, that's amazing." "Yeah," she said, laughing. "Feels weird. Like adulting actually works if you don't fight it." We both laughed. Then she grew serious. "You know, I used to think being the favorite meant being loved. But it just meant being protected from reality. You didn't get that luxury." "I'm sorry." The words hit deeper than I expected. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Apology accepted. Just don't forget what it cost to learn it." She nodded. "Never again." This crate be belting. Later that night, as I drove home, the radio played softly. The moonlight reflected on the hood, silver and quiet. For the first time, I wasn't driving to escape something, I was driving toward it, toward peace, toward myself, and I realized something I wish someone had told me years ago. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. You just decide who gets the key. The next morning, I woke up to a notification. Incoming transfer. $600. Kendra had doubled her payment. No note. No text. Just the quiet proof that she meant it. I smiled, made my coffee, and looked out the window at the Challenger parked below, gleaming black under the morning Sunday. My past didn't hurt anymore. It had become the reason I could help others. I'd lost my dream once because I didn't know how to protect it. Now, teaching others to do the same had become my new purpose. The life I'd rebuilt wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And that, I realized, was worth more than any car or any apology could ever buy. It had been nearly 18 months since the day I found that empty garage, and my life finally felt steady. Not perfect, not glamorous, but grounded. Work was demanding, but manageable. My workshops were thriving, and my relationships, especially with Kendra and my parents, had shifted into something real. I'd started calling it the quiet chapter. It not the sort of the scenes claimed in their o'clock in the morning, the kind of peace that doesn't shout, but hums beneath everything like a steady heartbeat. Until one evening, when the past came knocking again. It started with a phone call from an unfamiliar number. "Miss Martin?" a male voice asked. "This is Detective Vaughn with the Denver Police Department. We're investigating a string of fraudulent vehicle title loans. Your name came up on a file from Cornerstone Pawn." I froze, the sound of his voice dropping my stomach like a stone. "That was resolved a year ago," I said quickly. "The loan was fraudulent, yes, but I got my car back." The pawn shop had security footage confirming my parents. "Yes, ma'am," he interrupted gently. "That's why I'm calling. We've uncovered additional irregularities involving the shop owner. We believe several of the loans made under his supervision may have been part of a larger scheme." I leaned back against my office chair, my heartbeat in my throat. "Are you saying my car case was connected to a crime ring?" "It's possible. We'd just like to take your statement." After hanging up, I sat in silence for a long moment. My reflection in the window looked composed, but my hands were trembling. I thought I'd closed that chapter, but apparently, the universe wasn't done teaching me about consequences. The next afternoon, I met Detective Vaughn at the precinct. He was calm, professional, a man who'd probably seen every shade of regret people can carry. He asked questions about the timeline, the forged signature, the interactions with the pawnshop manager. "Did you notice anything off during your visits?" he asked. I thought for a moment. "Actually, yes." The manager seemed nervous when I mentioned security footage. Too eager to cooperate. He nodded, jotting notes. "That fits a pattern. We've found multiple forged titles, often involving collateral worth far more than the loan amount. Cornerstone's been under quiet investigation for months, So, I said slowly, you're saying they might have taken advantage of my parents too? He met my eyes. It's possible. Not a vac. The irony wasn't lost on me. The people who'd stolen from me might have been scammed themselves. For the first time since it happened, I felt something unexpected: pity, not forgiveness, not yet, but an understanding that even betrayal can happen inside a larger web. Before I left, Detective Vaughn gave me his card. We'll be in touch once we review the full financial trail. Thank you for your cooperation. Outside, the cold air bit at my cheeks. I stood for a long moment, watching traffic move along the snow-dusted street. I thought of Grandpa's words again. It's what they represent that matters. He'd meant dreams. But maybe he also meant accountability. Because every choice, every signature, every silence represents something too. When I told my parents about the investigation, Mom nearly dropped her phone. Your father's going to have a heart attack, she said. After all this. Mom, I interrupted gently. It's not about blame anymore. It's about closure. Dad sighed heavily on the other end. If they were crooked, we should have known. We should have protected you. The irony made me smile softly. It's okay, Dad. Maybe this is how we protect each other now, by facing it. That weekend, I drove up to the mountain overlook again. The Challenger's engine purred as I parked, the air crisp with early spring. I stepped out and leaned against the hood, watching clouds drift across the peaks. My phone buzzed. Kendra. Hey, she said. Mom told me about the detective. You okay? I am, I said honestly. Just surprised. Want company? I hesitated, then smiled. Sure. An hour later, her little Honda pulled up beside me. She hopped out, wearing a sweater 2 sizes too big and holding 2 thermoses. Hot cocoa, she said, handing me one. Budget-friendly comfort. I laughed. You're learning. We sipped in silence for a while, watching the sky shift pink and gold. After a long pause, she said, You know, if the pawn shop was crooked, that means they scammed us both. I nodded. Yeah. Another tame. For Maida Felton ready for. She stared at the horizon. Funny how life works. You spend years blaming yourself, and then find out you were just part of someone else's bad plan. I looked at her. That's called perspective. She smiled faintly. You should teach that in your next class. Maybe I will. The investigation dragged on for months, but eventually, I got an official letter from the DA's office. Due to evidence of fraudulent activity by Cornerstone Pawn, all associated loans have been nullified. Victims identified in the scheme will receive compensation from a state fund. Compensation. That single word made me sit down. After everything, the sleepless nights, the financial strain, the humiliation, justice had come in the quietest, most bureaucratic way imaginable. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just closure. I forwarded the email to my parents with a short note. Looks like it's finally over. Dad replied a few minutes later. Some debts can't be repaid in money, kid. But we're still trying. Later that summer, I took a rare week off work. No meetings, no deadlines. Just me, the open road, and a full tank of gas. I drove west, through winding canyons and tiny towns that barely had names. Every mile put more distance between me and the chaos that used to define my life. Somewhere near Aspen, I stopped at a rest area overlooking a field of wildflowers. An older man sat nearby, sketching in a notebook. Beautiful view, I said. He smiled. Best therapy there is. We chatted for a while. Turns out, he was a retired mechanic restoring classic cars. When I mentioned my Challenger, his eyes lit up. That's a rare beast, he said. You take care of her? Every day, I said. He nodded approvingly. Good. Cars like that, they're not just machines. They're reminders. Proof you can build something beautiful if you're patient enough. I smiled. My grandfather said almost the same thing. The man chuckled. Then he was a wise one. Thank you watching. That night, I camped under the stars for the first time in years. No phone service, no city lights. Just stillness. As I lay inside the car, looking through the moonroof, I thought about all the versions of me that had existed in the past 2 years. The angry one, the hurt one, the rebuilding one, and for the first time, I didn't want to erase any of them. They'd all built this version, the one who could finally rest. When I got back to Denver a few days later, there was a message waiting on my voicemail. Hi Avery. This is Eliza from the Financial Workshop. We're launching a mentorship program for young women interested in finance careers. We'd love for you to lead it. I smiled. Full circle. I whispered to myself. Because once upon a time, I'd been the girl who thought worth came from proving herself to others. Now, I was the woman teaching others how to prove it to themselves. The first mentorship session started small. 5 participants sitting in a circle in a borrowed conference room. I told them my favorite line. The one that had guided every decision since. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. You decide who gets the key. They wrote it down, nodded, smiled. And I realized something quietly extraordinary. The story that had nearly broken me had become my bridge to other people. It was no longer about revenge, or even redemption. It was about purpose. Because sometimes, the life that collapses isn't punishment, it's an invitation to rebuild something stronger. Later that week, I stopped by my parents' house again. Mom was in the garden, trimming rose bushes. Dad was on the porch, reading the paper. He looked up as I parked the Challenger. "You heading somewhere?" "Yeah," I said, smiling. "Teaching my girls tonight." He nodded, pride softening his face. "Make 'em smarter than us." "That's the plan." Mom stood up, waving. "Stay for dinner afterward?" I hesitated, then smiled. "Sure, I'll bring dessert." As I drove away, the engine purred like a steady heartbeat beneath my hands, and I realized that maybe forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. Maybe it's about remembering differently without pain, because every mile forward had started with one hard, necessary truth. No one will protect your dreams the way you do, and once you learn that, you never go back. The first day of the mentorship program felt like déjà vu, like watching a younger version of myself walk through the door over and over again. 5 girls. All nervous in different ways. One fidgeted with her phone. Another avoided eye contact entirely. 2 whispered to each other, pretending not to care. And one tall, serious, with tired eyes sat perfectly still, as if afraid to take up space. Her name was Lena. When introductions started, I let them speak first. I wanted to know their stories before I shared mine. "I'm studying accounting," one said. "But my boyfriend says I'm too uptight for numbers." "I work 2 jobs," another added. "My parents keep borrowing from my paycheck. I can't say no." Every voice carried the same undertone: shame for wanting independence. Guilt for dreaming bigger. When it was my turn, I smiled. "I'm Avery. I used to think being successful meant never saying no. Turns out, that's how you lose everything." They all looked up. That was my cue. I told them the short version: how a family betrayal had taught me more about money and boundaries than any finance class ever could. "I learned that financial freedom isn't just about having money," I said. "It's about having control. Control over your time, your peace, your yes, and your no." Something shifted in the room. Even Lena, the quiet one, started taking notes. Weeks passed, and the group grew. Every Thursday night, I'd find myself in that same room, whiteboard markers in hand, teaching everything from credit reports to emotional labor. But what really stuck weren't the formulas or spreadsheets, it was the stories. One evening, I asked everyone to share the moment they realized they'd given too much. Lena spoke last. "My mom's boyfriend used my name to open a loan," she said softly. "I didn't even know until the collection letters came." No one breathed. "What did you do?" I asked gently. "I paid it," she whispered. "All of it. I thought if I fixed it, maybe he'd stop hurting her." She looked up at me, eyes glassy. But it never stopped. He just took more. Something inside me broke open. I knew that logic. That desperate need to repair what you didn't destroy. I walked around the table, sat beside her, and said quietly, "You can stop now. It's not your job to fix the people who break you. That's to be a places pro press as an hymn paste." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was holy, the kind of silence where truth finally lands. After class, Lena stayed behind. "I've been reading everything you recommended," she said, her voice steadier now. "Contracts, budgeting, boundaries. But I still don't know how to start." "You already did," I said. "You showed up. You told the truth. That's step 1. She smiled faintly. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," I admitted. "But it's worth it." As she left, I felt something I hadn't in a while, a quiet certainty that what I was doing mattered. A few days later, I was in my office, buried in quarterly reports, when Palmer knocked on the open door. "You've been busy," he said, holding up a printout. "What's that?" He grinned. "A glowing review from the nonprofit board. They're nominating you for the Denver Women in Finance Award." My jaw dropped. "You're kidding." "Nope." He chuckled. "Congratulations, Martin. Looks like the work you're doing outside these walls is making waves." For a second, I couldn't find words, not because of the recognition, but because somehow I'd become the kind of woman I used to look up to. Not perfect, not bulletproof, but steady, purposeful. And if there was one thing I'd learned since that empty garage, it was that strength doesn't come from never breaking. It comes from rebuilding again and again until your foundation is unshakable. That weekend, Kendra and I went for a drive together. She'd been saving up for her own car, and I promised to help her browse listings. "I'm thinking practical," she said, scrolling through her phone. "Nothing flashy. Maybe a used Civic." I laughed. You're officially old. Responsible, she corrected. You rubbed off on me. She glanced at the Challenger's dashboard, running her fingers across the stitching. It's weird, she said softly. There was a time I resented this car. I thought it symbolized everything you had that I didn't. I looked over at her. And now? Wei-Xing from aged. Now I get that it symbolizes everything you earned. The air grew thick for a moment, heavy with truth. Then she smiled. I want to earn mine too. That made me proud in a way I can't describe. Later that night, I stopped by the cemetery. I hadn't visited Grandpa's grave since everything happened. Not because I'd forgotten, but because I hadn't been ready to face him. The sun was low. The sky washed in orange and violet as I knelt down, placing a small framed photo at the base of the headstone, me and the Challenger, side by side. I get it now, I whispered. You weren't just teaching me about engines. You were teaching me about resilience. A breeze rustled through the trees. Somewhere in that sound, I swear I could hear his old laugh. By fall, the mentorship program had doubled in size. The nonprofit asked me to turn my classes into an online course. I called it Protect What You Build. Simple. Honest. Practical. It wasn't flashy, but it resonated. Emails poured in, students, mothers, even men telling me how the lessons helped them reclaim their boundaries, repair their finances, or simply say no without guilt. Every story felt like another brick in a bridge I didn't know I was building. One day, after a class, Lena approached me again. I did it, she said, eyes shining. I called the bank. They confirmed the loan was fraudulent. They're removing my name from it. I grinned. That's incredible. I couldn't have done it without you, she said. Without this program. I shook my head. You did it. I just reminded you you could. She hugged me, tight. I want to do what you do someday. And just like that, I realized something profound. My purpose wasn't to fix people. It was to help them see they could fix themselves. That night, I sat in my apartment, watching city lights blur through my window. The Challenger was parked downstairs, its reflection glinting off the glass like a quiet promise. Everything I'd lost, everything I'd fought to rebuild, it all led here. Not to success. Not to wealth. To peace. To the kind of peace that doesn't depend on other people's approval. Because once you learn that protecting your dreams doesn't make you selfish, it makes you free, you start living differently. You stop chasing love that comes with conditions. You stop explaining your worth to people who can't see it. You stop apologizing for being whole. And that, I realized, was the real reward. A few days later, I got another text from Kendra. Guess who just got a job at the credit union? Full-time. I laughed out loud. You're kidding. Nope. Apparently budgeting and spreadsheets are my new niche. Who would have thought? My chest swelled with pride. Not because she was following in my footsteps, but because she'd finally found her own. That weekend, she joined me at my next workshop, sitting quietly in the back. When it ended, she pulled me aside. You know, she said, I used to think you were cold when you said no to people. But now I see you were just choosing peace. I smiled. That's the goal. She nodded thoughtfully. Then teach me how. And I knew, in that moment, the full circle was complete. The girl who'd once taken everything from me was now learning from me how to protect herself. Not out of guilt, but out of growth. As I drove home that night, the city lights stretched behind me like a constellation of second chances. The engine's soft hum filled the silence as I whispered. We did it, Grandpa. He'd told me dreams made solid could outlast anything. He was right. Some people inherit money, houses, or heirlooms. Me? I inherited a lesson. A car that once symbolized loss had become proof that boundaries can rebuild love, and respect can rewrite history. And as the highway opened up before me, I realized, this wasn't just my comeback story, it was my legacy. The Denver Women in Finance Award ceremony took place in a ballroom that shimmered like a chandelier had exploded and fallen from the ceiling. Gold light, mirrored walls, champagne flutes that never seemed to empty. If this had been 2 years ago, I'd have walked in stiff, self-conscious, trying too hard to prove I belonged. But that night, I didn't need to. I had nothing left to prove. When my name was called, applause filled the room. For a heartbeat, I just stood there watching people rise to their feet, smiling, clapping. The moment felt bigger than an award. It felt like a full circle. Eliza met me halfway up the steps, handing me the glass plaque. You earned this, she whispered. I looked out at the audience faces of women, students, and even a few men who'd attended my workshops. And then, near the back, my parents. Mom was crying. Dad was clapping slow, steady, proud. And beside them, Kendra. She was filming the moment on her phone, mouthing the words, "You got this." I took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium. 2 years ago, I began. I thought success was measured in what I owned. My car. My job. My title. My title. Laughter rippled softly through the crowd, recognition, not mockery. But then I came home from a business trip to find that everything I'd built, everything I'd worked for, was gone. The room fell silent. My car, my dream car, had been sold without my permission. By the people I loved most. Gasps scattered across the tables. I could have chosen anger. And I did for a while. But anger doesn't build anything. Boundaries do. I paused, scanning the crowd. What I learned is that protecting what you've earned isn't selfish, it's sacred. Because if you don't respect your own work, no one else will. I looked toward my parents. Mom's hands were clasped, trembling. Dad's eyes glistened. That moment, I continued, wasn't the end of my story, it was the start. I learned that boundaries can heal relationships, not destroy them. That forgiveness isn't weakness, it's clarity. And that financial literacy isn't about greed. It's about dignity. A hush spread across the room, deep and real. I smiled softly. So tonight, if you take one thing from this, let it be this. Never apologize for protecting your peace. Because peace, once you lose it, costs more than anything you could ever buy back. Applause erupted louder, warmer than before. It rolled through me like music. After the ceremony, I stepped into the hallway, needing a breath. The night air smelled faintly of rain and tulips from the hotel garden. Behind me, the ballroom doors opened. Kendra rushed out first, nearly tripping on her heels. You were amazing, she said, throwing her arms around me. I mean, seriously, Avery, you had people crying at table 7. I laughed. Was that your goal or mine? Then came Mom and Dad. Mom dabbed her eyes with a tissue. You were incredible, sweetheart. I can't believe that was our daughter up there. Thank you watching. And they were gry. I smiled, soft but steady. Believe it. I've been here all along. Dad reached out his hand, not a hug, not a pat. Just a handshake. I'm proud of you, he said simply. For teaching me more than I ever taught you. I gripped his hand, feeling the weight of every unspoken apology wrapped inside that moment. I know, I said quietly. Thank you. Later that night, when I finally got home, I placed the award on my mantle beside Grandpa's old wrench, the one he used when we rebuilt our first engine together. It looked right there, balanced, honest. I sat on the couch, still in my dress, heels kicked off, and texted Kendra, couldn't have done it without you. She replied instantly. You did all of it without me. But I'm proud to be here now. I smiled. The next morning, my inbox was full emails from the organization, messages from attendees, even a few reporters. But one message stood out. It was from Lena. Subject. Your speech changed everything. Body. I quit my job. I'm going back to school for finance. I want to help women the way you helped me. I'm scared, but I'm ready. Tears filled my eyes. I replied, you're already doing it, Lena. You're brave enough to start. I hit send, leaned back, and exhaled. That weekend, I took a drive to clear my head. It wasn't the usual mountain route. I went further down winding back roads lined with wildflowers, past the lake where Grandpa used to take me fishing. The Challenger hummed smoothly, every vibration grounding me. When I stopped at the overlook, I got out, leaned against the car, and looked up at the endless Colorado sky. I thought about the past 2 years, the anger, the contracts, the rebuild, the teaching, the healing, and how all of it, every painful turn, had led to this stillness. I pulled out my phone and started writing something I hadn't planned to write. A book outline. Working title. Guard Your Ground. Reclaiming Power Through Boundaries. Not a memoir, not exactly. But a guide. A map for others walking the same road I had, where love and guilt and money got tangled until you couldn't tell them apart. By the time I stopped typing, the sun had dropped below the ridge. The sky had turned lavender. I laughed softly to myself. Full circle, Grandpa, I whispered. Guess I'm the teacher now. The wind picked up, rustling the pines. The Challenger's chrome caught the last streak of light, glowing gold against the dusk. 3 months later, I submitted the first manuscript draft to a small publisher. They loved it. The editor wrote, your voice feels like a friend who's been through the fire and came back carrying water. I stared at the screen for a long time, tears welling up again, because that's exactly what I wanted it to be. Not a story of revenge, not even redemption, a story of resilience. When Guard Your Ground finally launched, the first copies arrived on my doorstep in a brown cardboard box. I ran my fingers over the cover, my name printed neatly under the title. The dedication read, for Grandpa, who taught me how to rebuild. For Mom and Dad, who learned to listen. For Kendra, who learned to stand on her own. And for every woman who's ever had to start over. I sent the first signed copy to my parents with a note. Don't worry, no names changed. Mom called an hour later, laughing through tears. You're terrible. I learned from the best. I teased. But beneath the laughter, there was love again, not blind, Not naive, real. That night, after the calls ended and the house fell quiet, I went out to the garage. The Challenger waited there, sleek under the overhead light, like time hadn't touched her. I opened the door, sat inside, and turned the key. The engine's deep growl filled the space. That sound, the one that had once meant pride, then loss, then strength, now meant something else entirely. Peace. I rested my hand on the wheel and closed my eyes. Some dreams you chase, some dreams chase you, but the ones that matter, the ones worth everything, are the ones that teach you who you are. And as the engine purred like an old friend, I smiled and whispered, I'm home. It's strange how a life can shift so quietly that you almost miss the moment it changes. 1 year after Guard Your Ground launched, I found myself sitting in a television studio, waiting to be mic'd for a morning show interview. The host was cheerful, the lights were hot, and I'd somehow become the woman who turned betrayal into empowerment. I didn't plan it. I didn't seek it. But here I was. 3 minutes, a producer said, adjusting the small black clip on my collar. Behind the curtain, I could see my reflection in the darkened studio glass. A woman in her 30s. Calm, confident. No longer trying to prove she belonged in the room, just grateful to be in it. When the red light above the camera turned on, the host smiled. We're here with Avery Martin, author of Guard Your Ground, a book that's helped thousands reclaim control over their finances and their peace. Avery, thank you for joining us. Thank you for having me, I said, smiling easily. She leaned forward. Your story started with something painful, a betrayal by your own family. What gave you the strength to share it publicly? I thought for a moment. Because silence protects the wrong people, I said softly. I realized that by speaking honestly, I could help others find their voice too. My story isn't just about money. It's about learning that protecting yourself doesn't make you hard, it makes you free. The host nodded. That's powerful. What do you say to those who think boundaries mean pushing people away? Boundaries, I said, are what allow you to love people without losing yourself. The studio fell quiet for a heartbeat, cameras rolling, air heavy with understanding. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't in years, absolute alignment between who I was and what I was saying. When the interview ended, the crew clapped softly. The host touched my arm and said, You're going to change lives with this, Avery. I smiled. That's the hope. Afterward, I walked outside into the cool Denver morning. A light snow was falling, soft flakes catching in my hair, the air sharp and clean. The Challenger waited at the curb, polished and steady, like it knew this was another full circle moment. As I slid into the driver's seat, I saw a missed call notification. Kendra. I called her back immediately. Hey, she said, breathless. You were amazing on TV. I just watched the live stream. Thanks, I said, laughing. You're supposed to be working. I am working, she said proudly. At the credit union, remember? I was showing your clip to my coworkers. You've got fans here now. Tell them I said hi, I said, smiling. Also, her voice softened. I made my last payment today. The contract's done. For a second, I couldn't speak. I swallowed the lump in my throat. You did it. Yeah, she said. It feels good. Not just because I paid you back, but because I did it right. I closed my eyes. I'm proud of you, Kendra. I know, she said, voice trembling. And for what it's worth, thank you for not giving up on me when I gave up on myself. We stayed on the line for a long time, saying nothing, just breathing together, like sisters finally standing on the same side of life. That evening, I drove to my parents' house for dinner. It had become a ritual now, Sundays around the oak table. Laughter instead of tension. Comfort instead of caution. When I arrived, Dad was in the kitchen, humming off key as he basted a roast. Mom looked up from the salad bowl. You were wonderful this morning, she said, beaming. Your father recorded it 3 times. Couldn't risk the DVR cutting off early, Dad said with mock seriousness. I laughed. Guess I'll have to sign the DVD for you. We sat down to eat, and for once, no one mentioned the past. Not because we were pretending it hadn't happened, but because it no longer defined us. The conversation drifted between work, books, and Kendra's latest promotion. After dessert, Dad handed me a small box. For you, he said, his voice soft. I opened it. Inside was a single car key on a silver ring engraved with the words, For what you rebuilt. He smiled shyly. Your mom thought you'd like a backup key. Just in case. I laughed. You mean, just in case you ever need to borrow it again? He chuckled. Not a chance. That night, after driving home, I parked the Challenger in her private bay, the little garage Dad had built 2 years ago. I stood there for a while, tracing the outline of the key with my thumb. There was something poetic about it. This small, ordinary object, that once symbolized ownership, now representing trust. Not blind trust, but earned. Rebuilt. The kind that lasts. Over the next few months, Guard Your Ground took on a life of its own. It was being used in community colleges, financial therapy programs, and even corporate training workshops. Emails came from women around the world, some in English, others translated through broken grammar but perfect emotion. Your story helped me say no to my brother who keeps draining my account. I finally opened my own bank account. Thank you. What would facing faith? I thought love meant giving everything. You taught me it doesn't. Every message was a reminder. The ripple effect of one boundary can change an entire lineage. Then came the invitation that made me pause. A keynote offer. Not just anywhere, but at the University of Denver, where I'd studied business all those years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. Back then, I was the quiet student who thought ambition alone could keep her safe. Now, they wanted me to teach the next generation how to protect themselves from the very illusions I once believed in. The night of the keynote, I stood backstage in that same navy blazer I'd worn during my first job interview years ago. Kendra sat in the front row beside Mom and Dad. Uncle Harvey was there too, arms crossed, wearing the same half grin he always did when proud but pretending not to show it. When the announcer said my name, I stepped onto the stage, to the sound of applause. It was surreal, the same campus, the same auditorium, and yet, everything had changed. 5 years ago, I began. I thought I understood success. I thought it meant owning nice things, getting promotions, keeping the peace. But I was wrong. Success isn't about what you accumulate, it's about what you refuse to lose. I looked out at the audience. Hundreds of faces, young and hopeful. If you remember anything from tonight, I said, remember this. Don't wait for someone else to protect your dreams. Learn the rules. Guard your ground. And when life knocks you down, don't just rebuild better. The applause came again, louder, steadier, like thunder rolling through the room. And as I stepped away from the podium, the stage lights warming my face, I finally understood something Grandpa had tried to tell me all those years ago in the garage. Machines can be rebuilt, he'd said. But the person you become while rebuilding, that's the real masterpiece. Afterward, I stood alone in the parking lot for a moment, looking at the Challenger gleaming under the streetlights. Kendra came up behind me, holding her keys. Race you home? I smirked. You sure you're ready for that? Let's find out. We both laughed, got into our cars, and started the engines. Hers purred. Mine growled. Side by side, we rolled out of the lot, headlights slicing through the quiet Denver night. Not rivals anymore. Not rescuer and rescued, just sisters. Equal. Whole. At the next red light, she looked over, grinning. Ready? I smiled back. Always. When the light turned green, we both pressed forward, two engines roaring in harmony. And as the city lights blurred into a trail of gold behind us, I thought, this is what freedom sounds like. Some stories don't end with revenge or redemption, they end with motion, with forgiveness that doesn't erase, but transforms, with family that finally understands the value of trust, and with a woman who learned that peace isn't found in having everything, it's found in knowing exactly what's worth keeping. The road stretched open ahead, endless and quiet, stars reflecting off the windshield, and for the first time, I wasn't chasing anything. I was simply driving home.